Hello, guys. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Yeah, my name is Ebube Godwin, and I'm a licensed lawyer in Ontario, Canada. Okay, so I'm creating this content just to help people that are permanent residents of Canada or intend to become permanent residents of Canada, whether from outside or inside Canada. So there are different pathways to become a permanent resident of Canada, and I'm going to be touching on some of that. But the focus of this video is for you to know what are the benefits and rights of permanent residents of Canada. So you see what is available to you. You know, someone shared a story one time. He said, and one day he was looking all over the house for some money, you know, and he didn't see any money in the house, you know. And later on, he found that there was some dollars in his pocket. So that money has been in his pocket, but he didn't use it because he didn't know that he had that money. I don't know if you have ever been with your phone and you're looking for your phone, or you are with your key, you're looking for your key, but it was right there in your possession, but you didn't know that you had it. So if something is yours, but you are not aware that you have it, or you don't understand how to use it, you will never maximize it. So I'm here to just provide you some information. Some I learned by reading, some I learned by experience, that will help you, benefits, some of the benefits available to you and rights available to you as a permanent resident of Canada. So who is a Canadian permanent resident? A permanent resident of Canada is someone that has been granted permanent residence status in Canada, but is not a Canadian citizen. So have been granted permanent resident status, but you are not a Canadian citizen. So a refugee claimant is not yet a permanent resident until the Immigration and Refugee Board makes a determination saying that they are permanent residents. So until then, you are not. So there are different pathways to become permanent residents. You see the express entry that is so popular now, where you have federal skilled worker, federal skilled trade, and Canadian experience class. We also have a number of provincial nomination programs, all this for the economic immigration program. We also have the business class as well. We have family class, people coming into Canada based on relative. Maybe you have a spouse, have dependents, parents, grandparents, people that you are eligible for sponsorship. I'm going to do a video on how a permanent resident or citizen of Canada can sponsor family members, people they can sponsor, and how to go about the application process. So one of the beautiful things, if I may say it now, even though I've not gone deep into the video on explaining the benefits, one of the benefits of being a permanent resident of Canada is that you can sponsor certain people to gain the same status as yourself. So if you're a permanent resident, you can sponsor, for instance, your spouse to become permanent resident just like you. You can sponsor your dependents, your children or adopted children to become permanent residents just like yourself. And that's quite an interesting thing. Not just to get a work permit, but to get permanent resident status. For instance, I became a permanent resident through the express entry, and I was able to get my spouse to get permanent residency through the family class. So we have a number of pathways. Of course, we also have the refugee claim where you come in, you make a refugee claim, and if the Immigration and Refugee Board approves your claim, they can give you the right to apply for permanent residency and you become a permanent resident of Canada. So it's a wonderful status to have in Canada. When you become a permanent resident, you get a PR card. This is the proof. It proves your status in Canada, as a permanent resident. So anytime they ask for proof of status, you provide your PR card, and that's it. So you are not, if you want to travel through Canadian borders, whether you want to come into Canada from outside Canada, whether by road or you're flying, they're going to check for that. So you need your permanent resident card to travel. But assuming you are not with your permanent resident card, is lost, or for one reason or the other, you don't have a permanent resident card to be able to come into Canada, you need to apply for what is called a PRTD, permanent resident travel document. So this happened to me. I came into Canada. I did a soft landing. I went back to Nigeria, but I didn't go with my permanent resident card because I stayed very briefly, 20 something days in Canada, and I didn't have PR card. So I traveled. So from outside Canada, I had to apply for what they call permanent resident travel document. I was able to get that. Maybe I'll do a video about that later. Just subscribe to my channel. You're going to learn a lot about Canada immigration and about the laws in Canada. This is a service I want to render to people. So you can come to my channel and just get information about immigration law and Canadian laws. I'm going to be talking about different rights you have in Canada. You know, different things are available to you in Canada, how you can actually function in the terrain here, the business world here, the real estate world here. I'm going to be providing a lot of information on this channel. And then if you also need to do some consultation, you can make a comment on this section, you know, on the comment section, or send an email that I'm going to provide as well on the description. So, so let's move on. If you lose your PR card, you can actually apply for a replacement card. Okay, so let's go right into the benefits. What are the benefits of being a permanent resident of Canada? So I know many of them in my head, but I try to articulate all of them and put them together so that I can make this content for you. Now, right now, there is a law called the Charter, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, passed in 1982. In that charter is part of the Constitution of Canada. You know, is a law that is the highest law of the land. It provides under Section 6 of that charter that every permanent resident or Canadian citizen has the right to move to any province in Canada. You have the right to move and live in any province in Canada. You have the right to work and earn money in any province or territory in Canada. So you can go any part of Canada you want to go to. You can live there as a permanent resident. There may be restriction for people who get provincial nomination. So if you got a provincial nomination, usually they may require you to stay like 2 years in that province. So that's a limitation as to moving around. But once you've satisfied that requirement, you can travel to any part of Canada that you want to live and you can work there. So there is free mobility rights for every Canadian permanent resident, right? So that's an entitlement you have. Although there may be certain social benefits, like some health insurance, some educational funding that may ask for extra residency requirements in a province or territory. So other than those limitations, you are free to actually travel to any part of Canada you want, live in any part of Canada. Canada is quite big. When I made my discovery, Canada is like 5 to 7 times bigger than the landmass of Nigeria. You know, the country is so big, so large. So you are free to explore the country as a permanent resident of Canada. Right now, there's another law passed and it has been also extended. It started with a 2 years ban. It was also extended that if you are not a permanent resident of Canada or a citizen, you cannot own property, cannot own real estate in Canada. You cannot purchase real estate in Canada. So there is currently a prohibition on that. That now, when you know, I work with a real estate firm, and I do real estate as well. So there's always a need to make a declaration that you are a permanent resident of Canada. You know, it started from January 2023. So if you are not a permanent resident of Canada or citizen of Canada, you cannot purchase property right now. So that's the law. So that means if you're a permanent resident of Canada, you can own property in any province you want. Yeah, you can own it. Okay, so there is also health coverage. Usually this is done at the provincial level. So wherever province you're resident at, you can update or obtain provincial health coverage. You know, it's like an insurance. So in Ontario is called OHIP, Ontario Health Insurance Program. With that, you go to the hospital and you get free treatment. We went to give birth to our lovely daughter, and we paid $0. Zero. We paid nothing to go to hospital and get a baby. We see people travel to give birth, and that's lovely. You get the best of medical service at no charge. Of course, there may be some things that may not be covered, like drug prescriptions. What I do is that I use my office health insurance, the health insurance that my company provides to me. I use that to set off, to make claims, to get some things that are not covered by OHIP, but many services are covered by OHIP, and then I supplement with um, the insurance, that the health insurance coverage by my office is very important. If there are emergencies, healthcare needs, you can access the services of all kinds of medical professionals and pay zero. So you'll be given a health card. Usually one of the proof is your proof of residency, your proof of status, that is that you're a Canadian citizen. Of course, people that have work permit and work in Canada can also obtain this health insurance, but every permanent resident of Canada can obtain health insurance from the province or territory where they are residents. Okay, so there are a number of educational grants and loans, that you can get. You want to go to post-secondary education, you can get grants and loans for that. If you even have a family, a spouse dependent, you can get more money. In Ontario, you have the OSAP. So you use that and go to school. So you have a desire to go to school. Apart from the fact that you go to school at a very lower rate, right? If international students are paying $40,000, um, a permanent resident will pay half or 1/4 of that. Is quite incredible to see the reduction of school fees, because a permanent resident is treated as a domestic student. So you want to study abroad and you're able to find a way to get permanent residency of Canada, you can really save a lot on school fees. You can really save a lot on tuition, and with the ability to also work while studying. There is no limitation on the cap of the number of hours you can work like an international student. When you're a permanent resident, you can really study and pay less school fees and also get grants. There are some programs. If you know how to do the application properly, you can actually get pay zero, like everything is covered. There's also option to reject the loan or to accept the loan, whether or not you need it. You can invest it, right? So there is educational grants and loans for permanent residents who want to, in or going to school. Okay. There is social benefits, right? Like Canada child benefits. So you have a child, you can get amounts. It's like maximum of 600 and something dollars. So it's usually rated according to your income, your family income. So they calculate your income with that of your spouse to determine how much to pay you on a monthly basis. When the child turns 6, the amount can reduce, but every child, because of every child, you are paid a certain amount from the government every single month till they turn 18. So there are different things that people can put that money to. They can put it in a registered education savings plan and things like that. So I'm not giving advice on that, but you are entitled to Canada Child Benefit if you're a permanent resident. You have a child here in Canada. Okay, there are a lot of tax benefits as well. A lot of tax benefits. As long as you make your tax filings, you can get some refund, you can get some credits, a number of them. I'm going to talk more about tax. I have a master's degree in taxation, and I kind of have some understanding of the tax system here in Canada. So I'm going to make some more videos on that, how you can have some deductible expenses, some benefits and credits you can have, in taxation, tax rate, tax brackets, the amount of tax you can pay, how you can save on taxes. So there are a number of things around that I also have some knowledge about, that I'm going to do some more detailed videos about. Okay, so another benefit as a permanent resident is that once you meet the residency obligation, of living about 3 years in Canada, you can get your permanent, you can get Canadian citizenship and apply for your passport, There are also certain limitations that you should know about of your PR status, right? So even though there are a number of rights and benefits you can get by being a permanent resident of Canada, there are certain limitations, which is why people also end up wanting to become citizens. So these limitations are a motivation to actually become a Canadian citizen, right? So only a Canadian citizen can vote or run for political office. So that's it. A permanent resident with all the wonderful rights you have, with all the wonderful benefits, you cannot vote. And you cannot run for political office. Yeah. Okay. Some jobs also require high level security, of a Canadian citizen to be able to work in such roles. Another limitation of a Canadian permanent residency is that you have a residency obligation to meet if you want to be able to renew it, or if you renew your permanent residency status or to get citizenship afterwards. So you need to live for 730 days in every 5 years. So anytime you go to renew your PR status or to come back to Canada, or you've been out of Canada for a while and you want to come back, you want to renew your PR card, you will need to have met the residency obligation. You don't lose your status even if you have not stayed 730 days. But anytime you want to apply to get your PR card, a decision has to be made by the immigration officers as to whether you get it. Sometimes there are people that have not met residency obligation, but somehow they are given one more chance to try and meet their residency obligation. Usually after that chance, maybe the next time, if you don't have a humanitarian and compassionate grounds, you will likely lose your PR status for not meeting residency obligation. So that is a limitation, on your right. So 730 days is like it's 2 years of living in Canada, of being present in Canada. So I'm going to talk a little bit more on residency obligation, how you can find your way around it in case you're outside Canada. There are some exceptions to that. If you're outside Canada for certain purposes, you can still be said to have met your residency obligation. Another important limitation is that Canadian citizens can travel to more countries without visa. But a permanent resident can travel to many countries. That's actually a benefit, right? You can travel to many countries without visa. It's a major benefit, yeah? But there's a limitation to that benefit, right? Until you become a Canadian citizen, there are certain countries that you still will have to apply for visa. A specific example I can give is that a permanent resident of Canada who whose citizenship does not let him go into US cannot go to US without a visa, right? Interestingly, if you have a US PR card, you can come into Canada without visa. But a Canadian permanent resident holder cannot go to the US without a visa. You can go to Mexico without a visa, but you can't go to US without a visa. So by the time you get your Canadian citizen, you can go to the US without visa, the United States. You can go to many more countries without visa. The Canadian citizenship, that's international passport, Canadian passport is actually recognized in the world, and you can use it to travel to many, many countries without visa. Revoking Canadian citizenship is extremely rare, maybe for fraud or misrepresentation in obtaining the Canadian citizenship in the first place. But not same for PR. There are certain crimes you commit as a permanent resident, you can become criminally inadmissible. For instance, drunk driving right now, if you are convicted of drunk driving in Canada, you lose your you can lose your Canadian permanent residency status, if you become inadmissible to Canada. So there are a number of things that can make you inadmissible to Canada, and you can lose your permanent residency status on that ground. If you commit a crime for security reasons, treason, espionage, human rights violations, war crimes, things as serious as that. And things like drunk driving, right now, they can actually deport a permanent resident of Canada. Can you imagine that? If you are found guilty of drunk driving, organized crime, terrorism, all those kind of serious crimes, you can be sent back to your home country. That's quite serious. Another reason you can become inadmissible if you have a family member who is inadmissible, or you refuse to support your family members anymore. Another reason is misrepresentation. You made a false information, in getting the permanent residency in the first place. So for these reasons, you can lose your PR status. But it's quite rare to see a citizen lose their citizenship. It can happen for fraud or misrepresentation in getting Canadian citizenship in the first place. For instance, if you lied about the number of days and years you were in Canada, or there was something, a false, a misrepresentation in your application for citizenship, and you got citizenship based on a fraud, you can lose that, right? And if you lose that, you won't be allowed to apply again for 10 years. That's quite a long one. Under the Strengthening Canadian Citizenship Act, it is now possible to lose your Canadian citizenship. Like if you're a dual citizen, you can lose it. If you are found guilty of terrorism, you can lose Canadian citizenship on that ground. Yes, terrorism, you can lose it. Or you're a past or present member of armed groups in Canada and you involved in armed conflict against Canada. So such very serious things, it hardly happens. Such very serious crimes, you can lose Canadian citizenship. But mostly for normal crimes that would have made you lose permanent residency status, you won't lose it in Canada. You won't be deported. God forbid that you commit a crime, but you won't be deported as a Canadian citizen if you commit a crime that is not considered as serious as terrorism or involving in armed conflict against Canada. Another limit, it should be a benefit for you as a permanent resident to give birth in Canada. Your child is going to get Canadian citizenship automatically. But also, Canadian citizens outside Canada can give birth and that their child will become a Canadian citizen. Right? That can happen. But a permanent resident outside Canada, if you give birth outside Canada, that child cannot become a Canadian citizen except you give birth inside Canada. The best you can do for that child is to sponsor that child. Like I said earlier, you can sponsor a dependent. Okay, so that's the only thing. So I'm going to put on the screen a small table of differences between Canadian citizen and permanent resident. So let's look at residency obligation. So to keep your PR status, you need to live in Canada for 730 days. You need to live in Canada for 730 days for every time they calculate in the past 5 years. You need to be in Canada. It doesn't have to be continuous. It can be you come, you go, you come, you go, but make sure it's 730 days. So you usually have to keep record of your entry and exit, the dates that you left. Also is in the system. Yeah, they know when you came in and when you left, anytime you pass through the border. So anytime you wish to reapply for PR card or you apply for permanent residence travel document, there is always this check on your residency obligation. As long as you've been a permanent resident for up to 5 years, you need to have met it, right? It must be checked that you are able to meet your residency obligation. If you're unable to meet your residency obligation, you're at risk of losing your PR status. But you don't lose it automatically by not meeting residency obligation. A decision still has to be made by the immigration officer. And if that decision is not favorable, you can appeal it. You can ask based on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. Maybe you traveled abroad to take care of your sick father, your sick, child. If you travel to work for Canadian business or Canadian government, the period outside Canada that you are working for them will be counted in the 730 days. Or if you are accompanying you're accompanying somebody who is a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, and you are outside Canada because the person is working for a Canadian business or Canadian government, then you also, those period of time you were there accompanying that person will not, will be counted as part of the 730 days so that you don't lose your permanent resident status. So who is a dependent? Just for us to be clear who a dependent is. A dependent is somebody who um, is less than 22 years and is not somebody's spouse or common law partner. Okay, there will be exception to this age if the person is more than 22 years, but for a disability is you still provide for somebody, still providing for the person, is still being provided for even though the person is more than 22 years, right? But the person has to be somebody you provide for even before the 22 years. And the reason the person can't take care of himself or herself is because of the disability. Okay, losing your permanent resident status. You don't lose your permanent resident status because your PR card expires. No, it's not your PR card expiration that makes you lose the permanent resident status. You can lose your permanent resident status if you are removed from Canada. You can lose it if an officer determines that you are no longer eligible for PRTD or PR card renewal. So you can lose it on that basis. Or you voluntarily renounce it. Or you become a Canadian citizen. If you become a Canadian citizen, then you lose your PR status. So even when you have not met your residency obligation, please don't forget this. It doesn't mean you have lost your PR status. You can still stay in Canada until maybe you need to renew it. Yeah, then that's when a decision will be made. I hope you enjoy this video, especially the benefits. So make sure you are maximizing your benefits, your rights of being a Canadian permanent resident, and also know how to meet your residency obligation, know some things to avoid so that you don't lose your status, and know how you can actually maintain your status. I've shared many of this in the video. If you have further questions or you want to clarify certain things, feel free to make a comment on the comment section, or you send me an email that I'm going to provide in the description. And I'm going to leave some useful links as well in the description. I'm here for you. I'm a lawyer here in Canada, a licensed lawyer. So I'm licensed in Ontario, Canada, as well as in Nigeria. So I can help you with your legal issues. You have questions, whether immigration, real estate, and virtually any area of law you need consultation or you need to be pointed in the right direction. I'm your guy. My name is Ebube Godwin. Please like my YouTube channel, subscribe, share the contents that you found useful.